Welcome to the Thought Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Isabella Sanchez Castañeda. Let's jump right in. Today, we are joined by Danielle R. Harris, who is a marketing and messaging consultant who teaches coaches and service providers how to attract and sign dream clients. She does this by helping them share their unique stories in their messaging. And one of my favorite facts is that she has worked in the concrete industry and has been a marketing professional for over 10 years. She is an absolute thought leader in this space, and I'm excited to have her here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Today, I specifically want to talk about your thought leadership when it comes to telling your story. So many times, I think we hear the cliche of tell your story, own your story. What's the brand story? But especially in this Instagram marketing world, we've lost sight of that. So can you break down for me how it is that you help people share their story?
Yeah. So first and foremost, when people hear tell your story, a lot of things that come to mind are just like, okay, I'm just talking all about myself and it's very self-indulgent and I'm just sharing a lot of my business. It's a lot of things that I hear a lot of times. But really, as a business owner, the goal and the purpose of sharing your story is so that you can create a deeper connection with the people that you're wanting to serve. When they hear and learn more about you, they're going to be able to see like, oh, this is a person who can relate to me on some level, or this is someone that has the experience that I would like to have. Therefore, I want to be within their space and in their circle. So it's not coming from a place of, oh, I want to share my story to just like talk all about me. Really, when you're doing that as a business owner, it's coming from a place of service. So what I like to tell people a lot is that you need to understand who you're trying to serve so that you can then tell stories that are going to be relatable and of interest to them, for them to be able to see like, oh, this is someone that I do in fact want to work with, want to be in relationship with, want to recommend to other people to work with. So when it comes to elements of like, how do I go about sharing your story? I like to think of a couple different categories to really get focused on. And it really includes owning your background. It involves showing your personality, it involves being a bit vulnerable, and then also leaning into the values that you have.
I want to hone in on the point that you mentioned about it's a story about you, but it's really for the audience. And I think that that is a very fine line to walk for people. How do I, as the person telling my story, do like a litmus test on how do I know if this is self-serving or if my audience is actually going to benefit?
I think a lot of times when you're first starting off, you are going to get to a point where you're just like, I don't actually know. And I think that that is okay at the very start of it. But when it comes to when you've started to work with various clients, your first, second, third or so, you're going to start to see some similarities between those people. And you're going to find some commonalities between them all. So take, for instance, if you realize like, oh, actually all of the clients that I've worked with, they all had these very advanced degrees and they worked in this particular type of industry. Maybe I should share more about that so that it will attract that type of person, if that is someone that you in fact enjoy working with. And so it comes from that point of like, oh, here are the things that they are going through and experiencing. I have gone through some of those things. I want to show that I can be in community with them, that I understand where it is that they're coming from. I have overcome some type of challenge that is similar to what they may be going through or might go through in the future. And therefore, you're sharing from that perspective. And it, like I said, at the very beginning, it might feel like I don't know if this is just me telling stories to be telling stories. But what I also like to say on top of sharing your story, it's also about if the information that you have in front of you, using that to then craft a story that's going to be very clear and call in the people that you want to work with.
Now, where is the line with boundaries, right? Where maybe something just happened to me and like I've been in the place where my clients have been, or I've been in the place where my ideal person has been, but maybe I haven't resolved it. Like, how do I know if I'm telling that story well or if I'm just going on the internet to gossip?
That's a really good point. And I was also talking to a client not too long ago about just boundaries of what you're sharing as well. And I think those couple things go hand in hand together. What is a boundary of what I share and don't share? And when do I know that I'm just venting because I'm just so raw? And I think a lot of us know on an instinctual level what that is, if we're being truly honest with ourselves. If when someone brings up the topic and you just get so riled up about it, you're probably not ready to talk about it. If someone mentions something and you start to quiver a little bit and it just brings you back, you're probably not ready to go talk about it. Or if you do talk about it, you're going to go on a 20-minute rant that's going to go down a lot of different rabbit holes, and you will lose the point of it, whether you're doing that on a podcast, if you're doing that on an Instagram Live, if you're just going in a workshop presenting, and then you just go all the way off book. One of the things that I like to keep in mind is, have you talked this over with somebody in your circle? Have you talked this over with a therapist? Have you talked this over with someone else, where they're able to say, like, oh yeah, like you've really looked like you processed this. Like, say you were going through a situation and you were working with a business partner and you split with this business partner and it was rough. Maybe within the first few weeks, that should not be something that you just go and rant about and talk about, or post about any place else. You can say something that's very diplomatic of, no, we split up, and when it might be months later that you decide that you're ready to talk and process that. But I think if everyone's being honest, they know when they are and aren't ready. But I think a lot of times it's always helpful to work with someone to see that, okay, am I coming at this from a place of like, oh, I'm still feeling agitated? Because I think once you get to the point where you're just like, okay, I don't think that this is agitating me anymore, and then it's not super raw anymore, but it could still be sensitive, and you could still be telling your experience from a place of like, okay, like it's not triggering, but it's not also completely just like fine. And that's why I always encourage people to work with someone else, because they can really help you to evaluate, okay, are you telling this from the most neutral place? Are you still coming at this from being a place of aggravation? And depending on what the topic is, it could be fine, but there are a lot of times things that are super personal. You look back a year from now and you realize, actually, I wish I hadn't said that. I wish I had said something differently. And having someone that's on your side, on your team, that's able to say, like, hey, maybe we should say this in a different way, because they can have that level of objectivity that they can say, like, actually, let's say this in a different way, or let's process this, or let's hold this until you get to a spot where you are actually ready to talk about this.
Absolutely. That is such a great way of breaking down different ways, like the gut check, being able to break down, maybe you have someone on your team who reflects it back to you, and then in general, just holding a bit of a buffer, which is something that I encourage my clients to do as well. And I'm also curious, another line in the way that you teach storytelling is how much detail, how much flower to the story are we putting in? Because we all know that friend who tells like the FaceTime story and the actual event took 2 minutes, but they have taken 30 minutes to describe it. Maybe we're not going to that extreme, but what is the line with like just enough detail, too much detail? How do you gauge that?
Mm. So within my own family, I tend to be on the side of just the facts now. And there are other people where they were just like, and they were wearing this color, and then they were wearing this perfume, and that has no point to the story at all, but it paints the picture. I'm here for painting a good picture of setting the scene, but again, we're taking this perspective of, you're a business owner, unless you are in fact an artist, artistic storyteller or something. What are the pertinent things that really show and illustrate and position you as the person who's the expert, the person that they need to be working with? If that's just your tone and your vibe, more power to you. Paint all the pretty pictures. Go have your blog where you're doing 1,000-word essays about all of the things. But as a business owner, I think really what happens a lot is, how are you able to distill down what exactly the person needs to know in order to decide? And so it is going to be some level of detail, but it might not be, these are all the things that I ate for breakfast, and then I put the fork into the dishwasher, and then I put all of this into there, and then I like some of the details, like some details like do add on, and other details are just like, where was this going? Where am I doing this? So, like, take for example, if I wanted to talk about my experience in the concrete industry, and so I could talk about how I first got the job, or I could talk about, like, okay, so at first I was applying for here, and then I was applying for there, and then I was doing this thing, then I was doing that thing. Because me as a marketing professional, I'm not a job search person. I probably wouldn't focus part of the details of the story of like all of the different things that I was doing to job search. Like, oh, went on that site and then that site, and then I got at this interview. I would start at the point like, what from a marketing standpoint is going to be the most relevant for the people listening to this story, and then go from there. So if you're looking at through the lens of, if this is the sphere that I'm working in, what would the people within the sphere mostly care about? And then if there are a few tweaks or add-on things, you're just like, well, that was just kind of fun. And that's going to be something that's interesting at that. But look at it purely through the lens of, who are the people that I'm really trying to speak to? What is the point that I'm truly trying to make? And look at it from that lens.
And I think all of the answers that you've given us is just going back to showing that you know why you're bringing up the story, that you know why you are putting it out there. And as much as it's interesting to you, it's also serving your audience. And I know that we've briefly mentioned it about concrete. So I'm curious how storytelling played a role in a company that was over 100 years old, selling something in the concrete industry. How did you first kind of sharpen this storytelling skill in that role?
So, just to go back again, I started off working in concrete. And so the organization that I worked in, they wrote codes and standards for concrete construction. So anyone that you're just like, oh, you have to build something up to code, that, like, this was the organization for that. So they would write codes for super tall buildings, bridges, infrastructure, essentially making sure that buildings didn't fall down. When it came to telling stories, it was getting to the point where I don't have a background in civil engineering or anything like that, but I am communicating to both engineers, PhD level individuals who have spent their life talking about concrete, and then at times also communicating to people who don't have that same level of connection to the industry, but also at the same time benefit from the work that is being done within the organization. And so really it's getting to, how can you get people to care? And so with that level of writing the codes for the construction of this important infrastructure, you're getting to the point of like, why would someone care at all? And you don't want your buildings and bridges and other infrastructure falling down. It's very important. Anyone gets mad if this very important thing isn't built right. If an earthquake happens and you're in a concrete building, you want to make sure that it's going to be safe, safer than a wood building, safer than anything else. And so when you're able to tell a story and convey the importance of something, that no matter who the demographic is, no matter what it is, that they're able to understand. And then when you're able to then pinpoint in very specifically to a particular audience, how I would talk about it to a civil engineer will be a bit different than how I talk to a third grader about it, but at the same time I can still tell a consistent story across the board of the importance of it. And that was something that really I had to do throughout my job, of being able to talk to many different stakeholders about the importance of something. And that was just a skill that I was able to say, like, oh, like, there is a lot of relatability. And when I we're transitioned out of the concrete industry and started to work with coaches and service providers, a lot of times people were saying like, well, my story is not that interesting. And I would tell them, you're more interesting than concrete. Like, you literally are. You have to be. And so when they're able to then see that, okay, if this is the story that can be told about this element of concrete, like, imagine all the things that you can be told about you and how you're able to then dial in on your one particular person, and then also dial in to tell a story to a wider audience. And so I think that being able to do this in a quote unquote unsexy industry just makes it even more profound, of being able to do that for individuals and people who do such amazing things.
That is so good. And I really want to make sure that the listener caught that piece about you are more interesting than concrete. You can tell a compelling story about yourself if you take the time to understand how that story is serving your audience. And I think that's so important. So I'm really glad that you emphasize that for people. I'm curious, how are you incorporating your story into your marketing? Walk me through how you're using your 4 core story framework.
Yeah. So a lot of times when people are thinking about, okay, how do I go about telling my story? I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do. Where I start with my clients is at your background. So as you just heard from me, my background, concrete industry work, a lot of times I'll talk about how I went to trade shows a lot and had to do a lot of work there, which was really helpful for me to getting very clear about how I talk about a product or service on the spot, being able to change up the messaging on a dime to be able to make sure that I'm connecting and relating to people. So like that's going to be the first step. So that's something that I like to integrate before. Another part is sharing your personality. So I tend to be very like straight to the point until it gets to something that I'm like kind of particularly interested in. So there was a time where like every single reel that I posted on Instagram had the music of the K-pop group BTS on it. There have been multiple times, whether it would be on stages where I was speaking at something else, like I would always drop in a BTS reference just because I needed to show the people where my allegiances were at. So that's, that portion of it right there. Another part is vulnerability. And something that I've shared off and on with people is that, like, for all of the talk that I have about sharing your story, doing it for myself is also one of those things I'm just like, mm, I don't know. Vulnerability, that feels awkward. And so when I'm also encouraging and telling other people to share their own story and perspective, that's something that I say this because I know it to be true, and also I'm not telling this from like it's so easy. I'm telling this from like I get it that it can also be very awkward. It could be one of those things like, who am I to share anything? Who would care? I'm not cool enough. I don't have a great enough story of anything. That was a thought that would constantly run through my head. So that whenever I share those types of things, people are just like, but that's your thing. And it's just like, it's it's very counterintuitive of just like I realize and I know the importance of it, and also at the same time I also realize all of the insecurities that come up with. And then at the same time, at the end of the day, I'm also talking about values. And so I like to bring up what are the facts. I definitely care, and I realize that the stories of people are important. I really care about making sure that women of color are able to share their stories. There are a lot of things running against Black and brown women from being discouraged to share their stories and their perspective, or being told that it's not true, their stories and perspectives at all. And so I think that it's very important to be able to help empower this particular group in particular to share their stories. Then not only that, I also have the value of how I work and operate within my own business. I want to make sure that people feel safe. People feel as if they're comfortable to share what it is that they do, because sharing your story, marketing yourself in general, especially as a lot of solopreneurs, holding that type of space is very vulnerable, and there are a lot of feelings and emotions that come up, and so I want to be able to hold space for that. So that's the value that I have important to me. And then also protecting people's privacy, because there are a lot of times that people are just like, I don't want to feel as if people are like, I'm sharing all of their business whenever I market everything. And so I want people to know that I'm just not like dropping everybody's name and all of these other things all over the place. I want to make sure that you feel like if I'm working with Danielle, and plus I shout her out in particular, like nobody has to know that like I like that we're working together type of thing. So when it comes to telling stories and telling my own story, like that is it in a nutshell. Those 4 aspects, sharing your background, your personality, that vulnerability, and your values.
So good. And I love how I want people to catch it. I don't want to, blow you up, but like the part about the vulnerability piece, about literally a story about having a hard time telling stories, immediately makes me trust you more with saying, Danielle, I have a hard time telling my story. And like, it's just such a beautiful example of how it all opens it up by being vulnerable, but in a strategic way. You told just the right amount of emotion, the right amount of detail in a relatable way. And again, I don't want to blow up your spot, but it's just such a great example that I want the listener to pay attention to not just the words, but the way that Danielle is executing and showing this thought leadership that she has in the marketing and specifically the storytelling space. And I also, something that I caught that you were saying was about networking and about being able to kind of react and respond to the person in front of you. And I know that you are big on encouraging people to be able to tell their story in networking events offline, to be able to tell what they do off of Instagram. And, so many conversations are happening right now about whether Instagram algorithm is out to get us or not. Can you just remind us why off Instagram marketing is still so valuable and so important?
I just want people to note and realize that marketing existed before Facebook, before Instagram, before any of the online platforms. Marketing existed. And as things change, marketing will still exist. And so there are some things that are very tried and true. And when people think of networking, like networking events, really it's just expanding the amount of people that you know. And with that, in the digital age, networking just has another additional element to it. But it's really how many people are within your personal and professional sphere. And so, as many ways that you're able to do that, like that's how you're going to be able to grow your business. That's how most businesses grow. They start off at that point where the people who are closest to them know about it, and then it gets bigger. A friend of a friend recommends it, and that friend recommends it to someone else, and then it just grows bigger. And there are multiple ways that we do that now. There's LinkedIn, there's Instagram, there's TikTok, but then there's also the traditional offline methods of in-person networking events. And what I love so much about those is that you just get a direct reaction to people. And not only that, like you meet a lot of people in different spaces that you might not have initially anticipated finding someone that would actually be a good fit. There are often times where you're just like, oh, well, I work in this like very narrow specific area. I don't, if I go to something else that feels like very outside, like it's not going to be of benefit to me. But the thing about networking is that you never know who someone else knows. And that's why you go to these events. That's why you're able to show up and just say, like, I'm just going to talk and meet someone and introduce myself because one never knows. Now, of course, there's always a way to go about this. Like, I'm going to be more strategic. I want to be able to go through and say, like, okay, this is going to be like the best use of my time. But at the same time, the more people that you just know and who know what you do, the better chances are that you're going to be able to recommend. There have been times where someone that I wasn't even fully aware of, like knew what I was doing. They were just like, "Oh yeah, like I know that that's what you do," and I've told somebody else that, and that's really what you want. Is being able to have more people know about what you do. And then when you get to a place of wanting to convert those people that know what you do into leads, the more people that you have within your sphere is going to increases the chances and possibility of you then converting that person to just a next person that you know into a potential lead that then can end up being a potential client for you.
It's so amazing, especially the piece about getting in the moment reactions to your messaging. And I know that this was something in conversations that you and I have had before, Danielle. It was something that's just like so obvious, but we don't think about it. And we get so caught up in like, well, how many times would I have to post and like A/B testing and how many different people would I need to talk to on Instagram and on LinkedIn to get this sort of organic reaction versus walking into a room full of people who may or may not be your ideal clients and looking at their face as to whether or not they get excited about what you just said,
Mm-hmm.
or if they look at you like, we all know the look, like,
Yep,
okay.
not interested. They're looking for their exit to leave the conversation, and which is all really great information. I know that when I was, working in the concrete industry, when I was doing a lot of trade shows, I had to be able to quickly assess who is this person? Would they be interested in anything that we have to offer? If they are, what exactly are their needs? And then what are the four things that are going to help them make a buying decision right now? So we had lots of books about concrete. So I need to understand, like, okay, so what's your profession? Oh, what are the core things that you're looking at right now? Oh, how can I tie in all of those things that you're looking for into something that we already have? And then as you're going through conversations, is being able to assess, okay, well, do they have this problem or that problem? How would I best be able to say that this is going to be enticing? Are they going to be motivated by a discount that's being offered right now? Are they going to be enticed by, like, oh, you'll get access to these types of people? Oh, you'll be able to have these questions answered on a regular basis. You'll be able to do just trying to say, like, oh, what are these types of people really interested in? And then you're able to see patterns like, oh, when I talked to these people who were general contractors, they loved anytime this thing was mentioned, versus this group of professors over here, they loved when this other thing, and that's going to be more information. And you're like in the middle of a group of people and you're able to get all that information, you can get so much within the confines just in a day, versus a lot of posting that you go out there and just like, okay, is this message working? Is that message working? You're not exactly sure. You can be sure to an extent, but it's nothing like being able to read a person's face. And that's the same experience that my clients have been able to have. They've been able to say, like, oh, well, when I talked about this thing, they really lit up. And then having the wherewithal to say, like, oh, okay, good mental note. Let me go back and write that down. So whenever I'm then creating content on the back end, something that they did in an in-person space then was able to directly translate to how they wanted to show up online. And so they really feed each other. It enhances everything that you do.
So good. If anyone's listening and they're about to launch something new or they're about to shift their messaging, go find a good networking event locally in person and just try out the messaging on 5 people in 5 different ways. That's so good right there. And I want to, as we start to wrap up our interview, I want to talk about what is it to be a thought leader in your eyes, especially as someone who is leading through storytelling.
I think thought leader comes with a lot of connotations for some people. They think that, like, oh, I have to be at a certain level. I have to have achieved a certain thing. If I'm a business owner, I had to have made X amount of dollars. I need to have been working for X amount of years and have X amount of degrees. But really, it's coming to a place where you know what you know. You are solid in that. That if nothing else, if you learned nothing else, you were like, I do know that this is a thing that I can execute on very well. And I think a lot of people are in a position where they're just like, well, I need one more certification. And I feel like I'll be a good thought leader when I do one more thing or I have like a few more clients. I get that because as someone who also was like, well, I don't know if my story is interesting enough or this or that. I also had to get to the point of realizing, oh, well, if I kept going through this, I would get PhDs, multiple of them, additional degrees, and I might still feel like I don't know enough. And realizing, like, oh, you actually can't know everything, but you can be very sure of the things that you do know. So, to be a thought leader is to own that you know what it is that you're doing. And once you get to a place where you're like, I know what I'm doing in this arena and I can always grow, I think you're going to be so much better off, because anyone else is usually saying, like, oh, well, I don't know. We don't know. You can always know more. That's just going to be the facts of life. There's always something else to learn. Things are going to change and you're going to have to update. But really being a thought leader is realizing that, like, you have a perspective on things that are out there and that new information will always come. But what you know to be true is something that you are willing to share with other people.
Amazing and so important to take away that you will always want to and need to know more, but it's that ownership and claiming what you know that is so important. Thank you so much for joining us today, Danielle. I would love for people to be able to dive in deeper to your storytelling, to your thought leadership. Please let us know where the best places to find you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So you are more than welcome to follow me on Instagram at danielle.r.harris. You can also follow me on LinkedIn at Danielle R. Harris. But if you want to learn some more about some of the concepts that I talked about here on this podcast, you can go to, I believe, episode 3 of my own podcast, Marketing That Works, and you'll learn more about all of the different aspects of telling a good story, and then you can go and apply that for your own business.
Marketing That Works is an amazing podcast and it's very straight to the point. So please go check that out. Go check out Danielle's information included in the show notes, and we'll see you very soon.
Thank you for having me.